In this lesson, we'll look at how we can group selectors so that we can make our code more flexible and easy to maintain. Now what I want to do is I want to structure this page so that as I add more tags to my HTML and govern the presentation of those tags with selectors, I want to make my code easier to maintain by grouping selectors together where I have common CSS styles that I wish to apply to them. Let's modify our HTML a little bit first so we can see how we can benefit from this. I'm going to look at my paragraph element, and I'm going to split this paragraph element up into two pieces. I'm going to position my mouse before the word there and hit the return key several times on my keyboard to separate these two pieces of text. I'm also going to clean up the justification a little bit so that the first word of each of the sentences is indented one tab further than my paragraph element. Now, as you can see, I've spaced out the text, but these two items are still within the same paragraph element. I want each of these items to be in their own paragraph element. We can accomplish this by, after the first sentence, hitting the return key and tab key on our keyboard and typing a closing paragraph tag to close off the opening paragraph tag and create an HTML element around this first sentence. But if I do that, I need to create an opening paragraph tag before the second sentence, otherwise this will become a broken HTML element. Now that I have two paragraph tags, perhaps I want to have a heading that goes with this second paragraph tag. But I might make that heading a smaller heading, so I'll use the H2 tag when I type the words "learn more." Now if I save my file from the File menu and switch over to my browser and hit reload, we can see that the H2 tag does not look and feel like the way the H1 tag does. Well, we know how to fix that by scrolling up inside our CSS styles and defining a rule for H2. Now I know that that rule is going to look very much like the rules for H1, so I might copy by clicking after the closing curly bracket and holding down my left mouse button and selecting a range of text, that range being everything from my H1 selector to the closing curly bracket after my CSS rules for this selector, and from the Edit menu copy that into memory, and then paste that into the document again so that I could change this second instance of H1 to H2 and decrease the font size slightly from 16 point to, say, 14 point, so that I have two rules, one for H1 and one for H2, that generate a similar look for both selectors. If I save that file, switch to our browser and reload, we can see the expected result. But you can see, well, we're starting to get many lines of code in our document, and there's a degree of common formatting between our rules. I have the same color specification and same font family specification for both H1 and H2. This doesn't exactly seem efficient. I have to do this every time? No, we don't. We've touched on the subject of inheritance a little bit. We're going to start to explore that more and more moving forward. The concept that we want to follow is we want to group our selectors together and define rules that are common for those selectors. And then, where we have exceptions, such as font size, for H1 and H2, create separate rules that will have those parameters and pass those parameters to the copy within your document. How do we do this? Well, to get started, let's copy the rule for H1 again. Copy that into memory and position it before the H1 rule by selecting Edit and paste. Now we're doing this because we want to group the H1 and H2 selectors together in our CSS so that we can define properties that both tags will inherit at the same time. So after our H1 selector, I'm going to type a comma, a space, and then H2. But I don't want this font size 16 pixels to be applied to both of these two elements. I want H1 and H2 to appear differently in terms of size, but I want them both to have the same color and font. So I will delete this rule, font size 16 pixels. Now, when I look at the other two rules which we had worked with before, I see that both of these rules have a color and font family property value pair. These are no longer necessary. But before I delete them, I'm going to deactivate them, because it's much easier to turn something off than it is to recreate something. If you want to recreate something, you have to remember what you had in the first place, and that could be several lines of code. But there is an easy mechanism available to us to deactivate our CSS rules, and that is called commenting. What we're going to do with a comment is essentially leave our code in our page, but by way of some formatting, tell the browser to ignore those blocks of code. For style sheets, one commenting method that you will use often, and that we'll use right now, is to position your mouse before the first block of code that you want to deactivate, which in this case is the color property value pair. So I'll position my mouse before that property value pair and type a / followed by an asterisk. Likewise, to define the range where our commenting will end, I'm going to position my mouse after the last item that I wish to deactivate, and I'm going to type asterisk and then a /. This / asterisk / tells the browser, ignore these lines, pretend they're not even there. And since I know the color and font family rules in my H2 rule, which I have down here at the bottom of my page, are no longer needed, I'll do the same. I'll comment these lines out, essentially deactivating them, and save my file. So, my grouped selectors, H1 and H2, tell the text to be blue and be a sans serif font. My H1 and H2 rules beneath are only telling the browser to make H1 16 pixels and H2 14 pixels. Even though we have these lines of code for color and font family in each of those H1 and H2 rules, the browser is ignoring those lines. Now if I save this file and switch over to my web browser and reload, the page looks exactly the same, which is what we expect. Since we know that this is now working, this grouping of H1 and H2 together, those lines of code which I commented out are now officially redundant. We know our grouped selectors are working, so it is okay to go ahead and delete these lines, which I'll do using the delete key on my keyboard. And I'm selecting these lines by clicking with my left mouse button at the end of the block of text that I wish to delete and dragging forward until I find the first character of text I wish to delete, which in both of these cases are my opening and closing comment. With these characters selected, I'll hit the delete key on my keyboard, and then again, I'll save my file, switch over to my web browser, and reload and look at H1 and H2 and see that they don't change. My formatting is now preserved.